Hello there, and welcome along to Series 3 and Episode 15 of the Gardener Ben podcast, which is brought to you in association with Peter Beals Roses, winner of 30 Chelsea Gold medals and creating timeless roses since 1968. Go online and shop at www.peterbealsroses.com. On social media this week, I have finally kicked off my 2026 Great Sweet Pea Grow Along. And if you want to know how I grow exhibiting quality sweet peas here in the garden at North Lodge, head over to Instagram, YouTube or TikTok now and join me in my step-by-step guide. Getting anything done in the garden this week has been incredibly challenging. With a series of storms, high winds and driving rain hitting the UK, there's been very few opportunities to get outside and do very much gardening at all. One thing I did manage to get out and do was to prune my apple and pear trees. Here at North Lodge, I grow mine as espalier trees. I brought with me from my last garden 3 large 3-tier specimens and 1 absolutely enormous 5-tier specimen. Since then, I've also planted several small whips or cordon trees, which I've been training myself into espalier trees on fences in the vegetable and cutting garden. Pruning my apples and pears is probably one of the lightest jobs I do all year. It reminds me of my childhood when I first started getting interested in gardening. Aged about 7 or 8, I would climb over the fence that divided my parents' garden from that of our neighbours Roger. Our house was actually built on an old apple orchard, and several large trees still existed in the road. Roger had 2 such trees, 1 enormously large apple and 1 pear tree. He had a very traditional garden, full of soft fruit tree bushes, and was really old school, still using a cylinder mower. I would while away the weekend hours helping him out in the garden, turning compost, drinking milky cups of tea, pruning fruit bushes, and ending the day often having a bonfire to get rid of the garden waste. So pruning my apples and pears always transports me straight back to my childhood. Last weekend, I also found a small window of time to get out in the garden and start clearing some of the standing herbaceous perennials. Now this is something I do incredibly slowly and mindfully in the garden. Obviously, I chose a nice bright afternoon, which means a lot of the ladybirds and other garden creatures are starting to wake up and move about. My advice to you here is if you have to start cutting things down like I do, to start making your way through and actually do other things like pruning the roses and start thinking about mulching your borders, is to actually pile your garden waste up in an area of the garden, allowing any sleeping creatures the time to move off before you either pop it onto the compost heap, incinerate it or take it off for commercial recycling. You will be absolutely shocked by the amount of creatures that will crawl out of the piles of waste if you simply leave them on the drive for a couple of hours before taking them away. Now, nearly 500,000 of you have watched me online dig up my Dahlia imperialis, or the tree dahlia, that I had planted here for around 5 or 6 years in the vegetable and cutting garden. This enormous tuber I finally got round to measuring and, more importantly, weighing, and I'm not going to disclose the full dimensions of this particular dahlia just yet, as I'm still waiting to hear back from the Guinness Book of World Records to see whether I've made a new world record. So keep your ears and eyes peeled for information coming on that subject. As soon as I've had confirmation from them, the dahlia is heading off for propagation purposes and will be cut up and turned into hundreds and hundreds of new plants. I've decided to keep one small section of the tuber, which I'm going to replant in an area of the garden that's not under so much pressure for space, so it can do its own thing and it's not so important whether it flowers or not. Now on to this week's guest. Just before Christmas, I had the pleasure in talking to Charles Carr, who is head of production at the Hillier Garden Centre Group. Hilliers own and operate 22 garden centres across the UK and grow all of their stock themselves here in the UK. Continuing the conversation about why it is so important that we stop using peat here in the UK in our horticultural industry, the Hilliers Garden Centre Group is one of the few growers here in the UK to be completely peat-free. Growing across 2 different sites covering nearly 30 acres, Hilliers managed to produce tens of thousands of plants every single year in peat-free compost, not only producing things like herbs in 1 litre pots, which can take as little as 3 to 4 weeks before they can be sent off to retail, but also growing large specimen shrubs and trees like acers, which take many years before they have a saleable product. During our conversation, Charles and I not only explored his journey into the horticultural trade, but also the challenges that becoming peat-free has caused the Garden Centre Group. Unsurprisingly, many plants have done very, very well in growing in peat-free compost, when other plants that we've been used to buying off our shelves for decades have really struggled. This hasn't stopped the garden centre group focusing on their quality and blending a whole range of different composts to grow their stock in, producing plants for nearly 50 weeks of the year and forecasting stock months, sometimes years in advance, not only for their 22 garden centres, but also their online sales shop. I really hope that you enjoy the conversation that I had with Charles that follows. Today on the Gardener Ben podcast, we're staying fairly local to myself here in the New Forest, and I have the pleasure in speaking to Charles Carr from the Hilliers Garden Centre Group. Charles, welcome along to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, very good. And thank you very much for having me on.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time. I understand that you're very busy, and most people would find that quite strange at this time of year that you're absolutely sort of overrun with bits and pieces to do. But the horticultural season never ceases to stop, does it?
No, we never get a breather. And at the moment, we're kind of working our way around, tidying up the nursery, desperately awaiting the first frost to knock the leaves off the deciduous shrubs so we can start on those. But it's a constant cycle, and we're still potting a few plants for next year as well.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of people, and when they're not right down on the south coast, don't really quite understand. Our weather is incredibly mild, and we had a little tiny kiss of air frost last night, and a lot of people think, oh, that's great, your season sort of grows on and on and on, but it doesn't. It means a lot of things for me are still in flower in sort of December when they really should have gone to sleep sort of in beginning of November. And you end up having to put them to bed rather than sort of going to bed naturally.
Absolutely. One of our poly houses where we've got all the salvia nemorosas for next spring, they're all in full flower. It looks absolutely beautiful, but it's November, as you say.
Yeah.
They really ought to have stopped.
Yes, yes, quite. So for those, obviously, I'm going to introduce you. You're the head of nurseries for the Hilliers Garden Centre Group. What does your role on a day-to-day sort of entail? What are we talking that you're doing?
So we've got two nursery sites in Hampshire, one of 85 acres and one of 25 acres opposite each other on the road.
Hmm.
And I manage all of the production, staffing, procurement and growing across both sides. So it's a mix of sadly sitting behind a desk and ploughing through spreadsheets and software systems. And the fun bit is getting out on the nursery and playing with plants and getting involved in those and crop walking and making sure that they're doing what they should be doing.
And that's an incredibly large and, but by the sound of things, complex site with a lot of movements going on. So, yeah, that's taking some organisation to keep on top of that all. That's over 100 acres you're responsible for sort of overseeing.
Yep. And
And
and I think the biggest challenge for me is all the production planning. So we need to deliver to our garden centres about 50 weeks of the year
Mhm.
with clean, fresh, seasonally appropriate plants in the right volumes. So we're batching crops through and trying to have certain plants that we might want a batch in April, a batch in May, a batch in June, July, and August, and then we have to work out how to grow them, when to grow them, so that they're ready at the right time for the garden centres.
I can imagine that's an incredibly complex task. So you're forecasting not just months in advance, but also several years in advance with some of this stock as well, because this doesn't just sort of appear. It takes some time to actually produce.
Absolutely, and we range from the 1 litre herb crop,
Yeah.
which at the peak of the summer can be the very fast plants can be as little as 3 weeks,
Okay.
to 30-litre Japanese maples that are quite a few years in the making and take quite a lot of hand pruning and care to make a beautiful shaped plant that's ready for our garden centres.
And yeah, 22 garden centres in total now. Is that right?
Yeah, so we've got 22 garden centres and the online shop.
Wow. Okay. So I say very, very, and the online shop is also being fed out of the two sites that you mentioned as before, or are they coming from somewhere else?
No, all the plants, every plant on the web shop is all from the nursery here. So it's all been grown peat free in Hampshire, and every single plant that we grow on the nursery. So we produce about 1 million plants a year. Every single one of those is sold through our garden centres.
Oh wow, that was one of my other questions, is whether you were actually had the capacity to actually supply other places, or whether all of that stock is being eaten up by your own retail space. And by the sounds of it, I think that's exactly where it's going. It's that's where it's heading.
We used to supply the whole industry,
Hmm.
and about 7 years ago we stopped that because Hillier Garden Centre Group was expanding, and we realised that we had an opportunity to feed the plants solely into our own garden centres, which means we can develop our own unique range, we can have control of the supply chain, we can grow them in the most environmentally friendly way possible.
Yeah.
All of our plants are grown in peat free, but it also means that we've got one delivery going from Hampshire to our garden centre. So quite often we'll be delivering a whole Arctic load of plants from here
Hmm.
rather than 6 or 7 different suppliers delivering 6 or 7 different lorries in. So from an environmental point of view, we're reducing plant miles, and we've got control of the whole supply chain and visibility for the garden centres of what's coming through.
It gives you an awful lot more control, and as I say, a lot more accountability for the stock. You obviously want to put your best foot forward and make sure that the stock you're putting into your own sites is of the best qualities. That's really interesting to hear. So you mentioned about the environmental factors there, and potting into a peat-free mix. And this is a conversation that's come up several times in this season of the podcast, very specifically with Kenny, who is the director of horticulture in Covent Garden, and he was talking to me about the. Obviously, I've been in the horticulture trade for over 30 years, so I'm at the other end of things, doing garden. Well, I was doing garden maintenance and landscaping, and obviously I buy compost and stuff. So it obviously comes down to me as more of a consumer, more other than from the production side. How are you? What's kind of blended compost are you using now? Because peat free as a general doesn't really um, hydrate itself very well, does it? It's often bone dry on the top and sopping wet on the bottom, which causes a huge amount of problems for growing stock successfully. What kind of mix are you using now?
So we use various different mixes, and we've developed them over the years. So we're using mixes of wood fibre, bark, coir, a little bit of anaerobic digestate in our lavender mixes. We put a little bit of clay in.
Yes, yeah,
Um, so we use about half a dozen different mixes on the nursery. So we'll have different ones for growing outside compared to growing inside. We have an ericaceous mix for growing Pyrrhus, camellias, Japanese maples, that sort of thing.
yeah,
Um, it's been a monumental challenge getting to where we are now. It's been the biggest challenge of my career,
yeah.
and it's not all been easy sailing. However, we're gradually getting there and learning. And I think I've been taught, and all my career, I've grown plants in peat.
Yeah.
I'm on a nursery which was developed and built with irrigation systems and glass houses to grow in peat, and or even the range of plants we grow has been selected because they grew well in peat. So
Hmm.
people would have gone, "Oh, I can't grow that variety," and it's not become commercial. Whereas now there may be plants that have been discarded because they wouldn't grow in peat, but will grow in peat free.
Yeah.
Whereas there's other plants which crinodendron's a great example. Crinodendron's not easy to grow in peat. It's nearly impossible to grow in peat free. The flip side of that is that ferns are much happier in peat free.
Okay. That's a really interesting thing to hear.
Well, if you imagine their natural habitat, they're growing on a woodland floor, very
Yes,
often
with
on the margins of woodland. So
high levels of
actually,
humus and organic matter,
yeah,
and readily available nutritional value, rather than sort of peat being completely null and void of nutrition.
yeah. So they're almost we're creating a woodland soil
Yes.
with wood fibre and bark. So
Yeah.
there's quite a lot of things that are actually happier in peat free. And prior to going peat free, we grew choices and daphnes and things like that by choice in peat free anyway, because the plants grew better.
Hmm. It's certainly a challenging thing, and I don't think the consumer really understands when they're buying a plant or ordering a plant online, the complexity of what's happened behind the scenes with this changeover. And I think everybody understands that it's incredibly important that the most of the trade has made this move. But and I think they're also incredibly shocked to understand that the government seems to be throwing huge amounts of money at peat regeneration into projects, but it's still actually legal to extract l- peat from the environment. So it's still readily available. So which for me is just a little bit of a mind bend. I don't know how we can be paying large amounts of money to companies to sort of rectify the damage that we've done by extracting it, and then still keep it legal to actually remove from the environment. It's it's a bit of a complex conversation, which I'm going to be having with someone later on in the series. But yeah, it's it caused a huge lot of problems for a lot of people. I remember the days when I was training horticulturally that for a very small amount of time, and you might remember this, is there was a product called rock wool that was available, which everybody uh, propagated in. So like a
Yeah.
funny sort of woolly stuff. But then they found after about 2 years in the ground, everything used to fall over because it would biodegrade and everything just wouldn't stand upright anymore. So again, we've moved during this change. We've made some funny moves and funny changes, and yeah, now here we are blending composts. And you must be having to blend dozens of different mixes for the kind of range of plants that you're growing.
We use about half a dozen different mixes, and then various propagation mixes as well. And but we're constantly trialing. So
Hmm.
last year we ran a massive, lavenders are one of our biggest crops,
Yes.
and we ran a trial with three different compost mixes, 6,000 plants in each trial mix. So we had 18,000 pots in a trial.
Yeah.
In those we had sensors that data log and send up to the cloud, so we could look at volumetric water content, the feed levels, the compost temperature, the air temperature, the humidity. So we're really putting quite a lot of science into understanding exactly what's going on in the compost,
Yeah.
trying to educate ourselves and the growing team. And a lot of our water monitoring now, when we water the crops, we take water meters with us, digital water meters. So rather than picking something up and going, oh, I think that's a bit dry, or oh, I think that's a bit wet,
Yeah.
we're now putting the probe in and going, that's 20% volumetric water content. We need to bring that up to 25. Or, oh, blimey, that's up to 30. We need to leave that to dry out for a day or so. So it's moving it to a much more scientific basis. And again, learning. So we're not using any more water in peat-free,
Hmm.
but we apply it differently. So
Okay.
you talked about a dry top and a wet bottom.
Yes.
When we first pot a plant, it's really important, if we're potting a very small starter pot, that we keep the top of the growing media very moist so that that has a chance to root out and establish. So we quite often apply water almost 2 minutes at a time just to water the top without enough to soak down too much.
Okay. So
Um,
very much a mist, a very much sort of a light misting. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. And then as the plant develops, we then change the way we water. And the key is getting enough water into that pot. I mean, I mentioned a minute ago 25% volumetric water content. That's quite a lot of water in a pot. So suddenly you look at it and think, on a big patio plant, you're putting several litres of water into it to keep that wet enough.
Hmm.
So it's really about soaking things properly, letting the water soak in and soak through, and then letting it dry back a bit, because plants like a wet dry cycle, and then re-wetting it properly. The other thing we do is pre-wet the compost sometimes. So
Yes.
you talked again about, if the compost top becomes too dry, it becomes water repellent. We'll sometimes put a minute of water on it just to let the top get wet, and then you can put the irrigation on afterwards and it'll soak right down. Whereas if you just pour water straight onto the top of a bone dry pot, it just flows off the
Simply
edge and you
bounces
think
off the
you've
top.
watered it. Yeah.
It's very interesting. By the sounds of things, it's moved on an awful lot since my day working at a nursery. Now, I've worked in several nurseries and several garden centre chains, but I started and cut my teeth at the age of 14 in a production nursery. And my employer used to walk through the polytunnels and knock things out of pots. And if they weren't evenly watered, you were instructed to go back into the tunnels, which were often, normally blisteringly hot, with your hose, and you did it all again until the water hit the bottom of the pot. But you're approaching this from a really scientific stance. It's incredibly interesting to hear.
Some things haven't changed, so I still wander through them, knock them out, have a look at the roots, and make people go back and do it again.
But instead of shouting at little Saturday boy to do it better, you're trying to amend your irrigation system, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say
Not saying that you would shower at a Saturday boy, but that's something that happened 30 years ago when I started.
they might shout back now.
And they'd be well within their right too as well. But no, I just say
Yeah.
so things have changed a great deal since then as well. Now we obviously you mentioned you're producing 1 million plants a year, which is just a mind-boggling number. Last year, Hilliard's were responsible for launching 3 really exciting new plants, of which I was had the pleasure in introducing to my audience. Um, how long does a new variety like the plants that we launched last year, like you launched last year, the Philadelphus Petite Perfume Pink, and you launched Geranium Gold Nugget, and now you can say the next one because I get the pronunciation of this one completely incorrect. The Go on,
Ra-
go for it.
Raf- Raffia lepis indica white cloud.
There we go. How long does a variety like of these of the like new varieties? How long are you investing into something like this?
A long time, and woody plants like shrubs are a particularly long time. So the Philadelphus Petite Perfume, which actually won Best New Plant at Chelsea, which we were very proud of,
Yeah, yeah,
um, will have been over 10 years in the making. So Alan Postle, who was the Hillier propagator for slightly over 60 years before he retired, had bred those in his back garden as a private project, and he'd been hybridizing those for quite a few years. So after you've hybridized them, you're going to be growing, germinating the seed, and it will take 3 years before the plant actually flowers.
hmm
Once they flower, you then go, oh, that one looks nice. Let's see what that does. So you'll take cuttings of that, which will take 2 or 3 years to grow big enough to assess. And once you've got kind of 25 of those, you go, do you know, that really is quite a superb plant. Right, we need to proceed with that.
yeah.
And then in order to launch something, you need thousands of cuttings. So you've got to take those few plants you've got and start taking cuttings and
Butcher them
multiply.
up, yeah.
Yep, and multiply them up. And there's lots more to it. So you also need to leave a couple of plants to grow to mature so you can see what height and spread they grow to. You need to take some lovely photography because you're going to produce picture labels, marketing material, and that sort of thing. And you need to start recording all of the data so you know when they start flowering, when they finish flowering. So you really understand the plant. So the trialing is important, and not just in a pot, it's trialing some in the ground. So there's no point in us growing a plant that we can grow in a on a nursery in our environment if you sell it to a customer and it doesn't grow well in their garden. If it's something that works in a greenhouse but not a garden, it's no good. So we're constantly trialing and evaluating plants. But that to get that Philadelphus from the first hybrid being done to actually getting it out to market was over 10 years.
It's a huge amount of time and labour for somebody. Very much, I would assume, a labour of love and passion. But then it reflects as you once you put those numbers into perspective and the time span into perspective, a massive investment for any company or any person to to actually sort of make to bring a plant to the market. I don't think a lot of people would understand that it would have taken that long to bring to the market. So yes, the Philadelphia's caused a little bit of a well, of course, a very big stir at Chelsea, along with the other two as well. But yeah, that pink flower, one of the first, or the first pink flowered Philadelphia's to ever be launched. So yeah, very excited plants. I'm lucky enough to have it. Oh, I've got all 3 of them here in the garden. But the indica white cloud again, a really important plant as well, isn't it? Because that one is an evergreen plant, which produces a large amount of fragrant flowers, and that will take a really arid location. Now that's correct. So you could grow that on a south or west facing patio, maybe in a large pot, and that will not only flat because a lot of the plants that you plant in that kind of aspect generally are quite uneventful and don't really do anything. An evergreen plant doesn't, but this one looks phenomenal when it's in flower. It's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, you get that sort of early summer flowering of about 6 weeks, where it's an absolute massive flower, and
Yeah.
then sporadic flowers through the rest of the year. But the pure white as well really does shine out.
Yeah, I've got to work out where to put mine. It's still I confess. There's an awful lot of plants here a lot of the time. I think as I keep saying, I've got about 80 roses to find a home for that I reviewed during 2025. There's another 60 already on their way for 2026. So I've got to up my game here and start getting. And I've probably got about About 20 to 30. It doesn't sound like huge numbers in your terms, but when you're talking about a domestic sized garden of a third of an acre, I've got about 30 other sort of peonies and stuff that I've reviewed that I really want to keep, including the three that were sent to me this year. So where do I put these? I have to be quite ruthless. I have to move stuff about and I have to lose stuff to make way for the new stuff again. Because my trials, much as you were talking about, with the sort of 6 to 8, 10 years trials, taking pictures and keeping some in pots and keeping some in the ground. My process here is obviously normally only with one plant, but normally lasts between 12 and 15 months as I trial a rose and bring a personal review to my followers. That normally takes me around 12 to 15 months to do. So again, I've got these plants backed up, and I can see the volume that I'm generating. So the volume that you must have backed up on your over 100 acres must be vast. There must be plants everywhere of all sorts of descriptions.
Absolutely. So we've got a research and development tunnel, which is got all sorts of things in there that we're using, playing with new plants that people have bought us to have a look at. Amateur gardeners bring us things that they've found in their garden, and then the plants that we're hybridizing and tinkering around with. And it's a brilliant place because there's absolutely no mobile phone signal, so I can disappear in there and play with plants.
You can lose yourself back and go back to basics. So can you give us a little bit of maybe a little bit of a sneaky peek about what we might be able to expect next year? Are there anything new coming from Hilliers for 2026? You don't necessarily have to name them because I know that might be just something you might be able to do. But can we expect anything exciting from Hilliers this coming season?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got four or five new plants coming through, which hopefully, yeah, we will be able to get ready and have looking good for introduction at Chelsea, and we'll certainly be speaking about the first of them at Gardeners World Spring Fair down at Bewley.
Yeah, well, I saw your installation down there during in May of last year, and just a really, really, I had a pleasure in talking to several members of your team who were all very, very knowledgeable and very passionate, and who have been very heavily involved in the production of that garden, and that was really, really lovely to see. That was a beautiful landscape. Did you have any involvement in bringing that together, or were you just asked to provide the plants for this planting scheme?
So I don't get involved in it at all. My colleague Joe gets very involved in it, and you probably spoke to Emma
I did
at
indeed.
the
Yeah.
show. So
Yeah.
Joe is Emma's sister, and Emma does the design, and Joe pulls together all of the plants. But we've
Okay.
already started potting the plants for next year. We've got a load of stuff in glass houses that's already growing on, ready to make plants. We have quite a big area where we have larger shrubs, some of which are 25, 30 years old,
Yeah.
and have been to Chelsea and various shows. So we'll select out which of those we're going to use as well. I've seen all of the plans for the garden, and we're trundling along with, yeah, getting different plants grown up from last year. So we come up with a unique garden again this year.
Because the garden that was seen was for again we're talking about 6 months ago, so I'm hoping I'm getting this right. Four very distinctive different types of garden, wasn't it? And four very different aspects with four very different feels, containing four very distinctive different types of plants. And they were again, it was really lovely to see. And I often say that it's a bit of a shame that the public don't get to walk around in these things, because it was lovely viewing it from the outside, but the space from the inside must have been completely enveloping.
Yeah, unfortunately, because of the nature and the way that you're building a garden, they're not always robust enough to get people walking through the
No,
middle
I
of
know,
them.
yeah.
But yeah, it's immersing yourself in beautiful plants and the effort that goes into getting everything so that for that week of the year, all of those plants on there are absolutely at their peak is yeah, a lot of work. So it, it it's absolutely done to perfection for that week, with plants bought on and plants held back, and
Just going to say, because
there's
the show itself is very early in the season, isn't it? It's in May, so it's yeah, everything, if we've had a little bit of a late start to the season, everything can be a little bit further back than when you wanted it, and you were certainly showing a huge amount of colour, so you'd evidently brought quite a lot of stock forward by by forcing it or giving it a little bit of heat, keeping it undercover, to make sure that you had everything in tip-top condition.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a cold store where we can hold things back, a couple of different glass houses. So we have one dedicated glass house that is naturally quite warm anyway by its nature. So we spend a lot of time as you get closer to the show, putting things in there, moving them out, putting them in the cold store, moving them back out, putting them back in there. So just to get them and inching the growth forward so it's ready.
So it's
We also
timed to perfection.
Yep, and we also have a little light box so we can extend the day length for certain plants. Just the
Oh,
foxgloves are
interesting.
always,
So they think it's 6 weeks ahead of time because the day is that much longer.
yep, which we always end up doing on the white foxgloves, which always looks so beautiful in the garden, but don't quite want to flower in time. So we do a little bit of talking to them nicely.
So you mean very sternly? Come on, hurry
No,
up.
we're always kind and gentle to our plants.
As you should be, and they'll be kind and gentle to you back as well. So again, I don't think a lot of people behind the scenes would have understood just how complex that kind of thing is. Obviously, I specialise in roses and have associations with Peter Beals roses and Harkness roses and David Austin roses, and I know a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes, and that there's huge amount of effort they put into their show gardens. But when you're talking about, I mean, roses are one thing. Again, they tend to flower pretty much all at the same time. We can obviously normally assume that a rose is going to be in flower by about the first, second week of June. So that's fine. But when you're talking about a whole multitude of different plants, hundreds and hundreds of different varieties of stuff, everything has got to come together to look conducive at one point. So that must be very, very complex indeed and give you quite the headache.
Yeah, absolutely. And every year there's things that don't quite work. And every year we'll pull out one. Joe's favourite plant is Lilium Formosonum pricei, which is
Yeah.
a very dwarf lily with a full size flower. And she set herself the challenge of having them in full flower ready for Bewley show. So that's her own little personal crusade.
Okay.
Um, and she spends ages trying to juggle and manipulate those into flower. But yeah, some things you look at and say, look, it's just never going to work for there.
Yeah.
And other things, as I said, the foxgloves, we've got a very, very tried and tested avenue to get them through. Some things will respond very well to cold storage. Other things don't. So things like hellebores, because they naturally flower in February where they might be getting sub-zero temperatures on them, putting them in a cold store, they just shrug it off and laugh at you because it's then their natural flowering
Yeah.
period, and it doesn't make any difference at all.
You almost want to put them in a greenhouse to sort of think that they're almost a whole season ahead rather than keeping them back. You want to almost sort of speed them up and take them through another whole cycle to get them there.
Yep.
Goodness me. Yeah, I'm glad that's coming down to you and not to me because that would give me a bit of a headache.
That's why I let Joe do it. But it's also really fun as well. And when you put something in there and think, I don't know whether that's going to work, and then see it in full flower sat in the middle of one of those gardens, it's really satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just astonished because again, I'm hoping that some of the people listening would have actually seen the installation because we're talking about some really large and quite substantial things that I would, they're actually trees. I mean, there were several full-blown apple trees in one of the corners of your garden. So those it's really interesting to hear because again, Kenny, who is director of horticulture up at Covent Garden, was saying that they have a nursery where they because of environmental reasons they are literally recycling stock small trees and stuff that they put through Covent Garden and the hundreds of installations he oversees. It's really interesting to hear that you're keeping those larger items. You've got a sort of an also almost sort of a plant library or catalogue of plants that you can go and pick for different things. And actually we could use that, or we may use that 5 or 6 years ago, we might be able to use that again, and you're still using and recycling those as they get bigger and better. Or um
Yeah, they gradually get bigger and better. We have to do all sorts of things to look after them. So last year we pruned all the Japanese maples just to give them some fresh growing media and bring them back to refreshing them. Sometimes the plants just get a bit too big. And a few years ago, um, our garden centre down at Cheddar has a crazy golf course,
Uh-huh.
It's been planted up with a whole load of old ex Chelsea Flower Show shrubs. So now has this absolutely spectacular planting to recycle and reuse and keep those plants growing rather than chucking them out.
By the sounds of things, a very much desirable crazy golf course to go and have a look at if you're interested in plants and obviously in crazy golf and you're near Cheddar. So it's
Yeah.
sounds like a really good one to go and visit.
Yeah, absolutely. And you might get distracted from your crazy golf though.
So we were talking earlier about the new varieties. Just sort of, have you got anything that's more really hot right now? What you said you were producing stock in batches and forecasting when you needed stuff coming into the retail sector. Obviously, we're heading thundering now towards Christmas, and most people's attentions are heading towards their house. But what's really hot in the nurseries and the garden centres now? What are you sending out over the next couple of weeks to tempt people with, and what can they look out for?
So a really key crop at the moment is hellebores. So we
Hmm.
work, and I love hellebores. And
So do I.
actually,
Yeah.
every year I start looking at them and getting really excited by them. And they flower. I mean, the first ones are in flower now, and there'll be varieties still in flower in March and April. So there's not that many plants that flower solidly for 6 months and
No.
in an array of colours. So beautiful, beautiful. There's been a lot of breeding work on them. So you've got ranging from the slate grey, almost black ones through reds, pinks, right through till the whites. There's yellows, there's singles, there's doubles, there's picotees. Really spectacular. They make a beautiful pot plant for your Christmas doorstep or a little display. Very, very, very good plants. And actually, with modern breeding, you've got varieties that grow in full sun, in shade. So there's a lot of different uses for them. And as I say, I start picking through them and then end up planting some hellebores every single year at home.
I must confess, I have quite a large collection as well, but every time I seem to venture out, there always seems to be something new and exciting to tempt me. So yeah, so hellebores are heading out into stores right now. Anything else? Because often say to people that obviously I get asked an awful lot about how to create a garden over that's going to give interest all year round. And I quite often say to people that listen to and that follow me that if you want a garden that's going to captivate your attention all year round, go out into the garden all year round. It's no good going out in. Most people are guilty of this. I say when my was worked in garden centres, but most people will go out in around Easter to the bank holiday, the May bank holidays, and they'll do all of their shopping to get their garden looking absolutely perfect for the months of April, May, and June, and then their gardens go pretty dull. And I say to people, if you're going to create a garden that has all year round interest, shop around every 6 weeks. Go at least every 6 to 8 weeks to a garden centre, plant store, or online, and buy something that the people like yourselves are actually putting in front of you, because that's what's in flower, that's what's interesting now. And if you don't have the skill horticulturally to plant a garden to give you all round interest, you can buy a garden by just simply buying what's in front of you and it looks good, and you create a canvas over a year long period. If you don't fill your garden too quickly and actually leave some space for it to grow into, and you can punch stuff in between, that over a 12-month period, if you've done that shopping over a period of time, you end up with a garden that's going to really captivate your attention and really look good all year round.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do a weekly crop walk with the garden centre buyer, which we did yesterday. So
Yeah.
we've got abelias that are looking beautiful coming into the autumn. Those have been flowering for ages. We've got the cornus now, which are just coming to the end of spectacular autumn colour.
Hmm.
They'll then drop their foliage, and you've got the lovely upright stems with the gorgeous colours. So you've
Yeah.
got blacks, reds, yellows of the stems. Kessel ringii, which is a very, very dark one, is beautiful, and Flavarima with lovely yellow stems.
Yeah,
So
I'm actually looking at both of those through my patio doors right now in what I call my winter garden, which houses all of my well, it's got a load of roses in it, but it's got a load of topiary in it, and a load of cornus and a load of hellebores as well. So by the time I'm planting the kind of things that you're putting in front of people right now.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm just trying to think what else we were looking at. Virginia Autumn Magic. So I think begonias get very underrated, and there's beautiful begonias good evergreen ground cover, really tolerant of a wide range of conditions. And when they flower, they're spectacular.
Hmm.
And Autumn Magic's a really good one because it's in full flower with dark pink flowers now. So
It's not one I've heard of. So I'll have to give that a bit of a Google when we finished our call.
yeah, well, most of them are spring flowering, so this gives you a different season of interest. And as you say, you want something. You should be able to get a garden with something flowering in it every day of the year, with snowdrops and hellebores and witch hazels and that sort of thing. And it then gives you a reason to get out there and enjoy your garden as well, even on the gloomiest of days.
Yeah, yeah, which is what I find important just to sort of get. I say there's only around, I should think, only about 2 weeks where the garden doesn't have me present in it, and I normally take a couple of weeks just off after Christmas where I'm still gardening, I'm planning things, I'm not actually physically outside, and then I sort of venture out probably towards the middle part of January again and sort of think, right, well, now what am I going to get on with? And it's always the hellebores and the snowdrops and the witch hazels which welcome me at that time of year, which can be quite challenging.
Yeah, absolutely, and quite a few of them are fragrant as well. So those early flowering things like the witch hazels and daphnes, absolutely wonderful for their fragrance. And at the moment, I keep going past Elaeagnus, and again, the fragrance from Elaeagnus at this time of year is absolutely spectacular. Tiny little insignificant flowers, you probably wouldn't even notice that they were flowering,
Yeah.
but the scent on them is as good as a Daphne, really.
Well, because again, most people will think that the word pungens in the name will come from the very sort of spiky spikes that it has, but it's actually the sheer amount, the volume of fragrance it produces, isn't it? That's where the name comes
Yeah.
from. It's not actually the vicious spikes.
No, lovely things.
We're probably working a little bit backwards here, and I probably skipped a stage early on in our conversation. I do apologise. Would you just like to? 'Cause this is something I talk about an awful lot, trying to inspire, especially the older generation. Not saying you're an older generation, but I try and tell my listeners that if they come across a young person with any sort of passion or interest in being outside and growing things and moving towards a horticultural career, how they can actually spark that young person's mind and actually keep that enthusiasm burning. Would you mind just sharing quickly with us how what your journey into horticulture actually looked like?
Complete chance. So I think I would suggest that school didn't suit me very much.
Okay,
Um,
didn't
and
suit me
having
very
left
well either.
and many other horticulturalists,
Yeah.
we're practical people. Um, I left school at 16. I really didn't know what to do. And I think my mum may have been despairing, and then came back and went, right, there's a nursery up the road looking for staff. Why don't you go up there?
Yeah.
So I went up to the local nursery. I think that was on a Tuesday afternoon, and had an interview. And they said, right, well, you'll hear from us in a few weeks' time. We'll be looking at who we appoint. And on the Friday, they rang up and said, we've got some big orders for next week. Could you start on Monday?
Okay. And what we can I ask what you were doing? What job you applied for? What were you doing at the nursery?
Well, by luck, it happened to be Hillier Nurseries that was up the road from me.
Okay. Bullseye.
Which at the time it was just a nursery. It was just a place. I knew nothing about plants. I was potting plants, sweeping beds, watering plants, picking plants for orders. I, having been taken on as a seasonal, I became an apprentice. So I did 3 month rotation. So I worked in the tree crop, I worked in propagation, I worked on the nursery. So over the course of 3 years, got a lot of
Hmm.
experience. After that, I then decided horticulture was a wonderful thing to do, and went and studied horticulture full time at Writtle for 4 years.
Yeah.
And then I've worked on various nurseries until coming back to Hillier about 8 years ago now.
Wonderful. So again, really again. I just find it so interesting to hear how everybody sort of arrived where they are, and many people like myself. I mean, I started with gardens and horticulture at a very young age, maybe 6, and then rapidly pursued a career in garden centre, well, horticulture and in garden centres and garden retail, and then for some reason, well, not for some reason, I moved away from it for financial reasons, and went and did something else, which simply didn't work out, and I wasn't very happy doing at all. And then gravitated back towards it, thinking, actually, no, my happiness and my fulfillment is far more valuable to me than the money I could earn doing other things. And here we are. oh God, I hate to say it, but 30 years later, still doing it. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear. So yeah, you are your mother a huge debt by the sounds of things. You need to thank her.
I think that would be all the talks I do to gardening clubs when she twists my arm. I also used to love growing cacti and succulents, even as quite a young boy.
Yeah.
And I think it's that growing something for yourself, pulling off a little side shoot of a cacti, putting it in a pot and watching it grow, getting a Mexican hat plant or mother of millions and taking one of the little plantlets off the side of a leaf and watching that grow into something. I genuinely, I can't think of anything more satisfying than watching a plant grow from nothing.
Yeah. I mean, I asked Philip Harkness this question just a couple of days ago, and he refused to answer, which was very diplomatic of him, because obviously he creates brand new plants, and his family are responsible for producing over 450 brand new rose varieties over the last 5 generations. But if I had to ask you, was there one particular plant or type of plants that were your absolute favourite? Would you be able to pick?
I would. So the answer, I suspect, changes through
Okay.
the year. If you asked me what my favourite plant was today, I'd tell you.
Okay,
My
well,
long
maybe could you give us maybe four then? Could I bully you into four?
so
One
my
for each season.
always the group of plants that I like the most and I found the most fascinating are the aroids. So things like Xanthidescia, Aracema, Asarum, those and I just think they're so odd.
Yeah,
And they're fabulous, but they're specialist and difficult to grow. And but they're also horticulturally fascinating.
hmm
And I've got them lurking in my garden. And my wife goes, "What's the point of a plant that's brown and you have to get on all fours, lift up a leaf to see the flower?" Well, I know it's there, and I go and find it every year, and it's great. I, However, I think some of my greatest pleasures come from quite simple things. So my apple trees I absolutely love, and they've been brilliant every year. They're beautiful in blossom. I quite enjoy pruning them because it's quite a good horticultural skill. And then
this
you
very
get,
methodical and
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
you get the fruit off them. So they're absolutely wonderful. I love witch hazels. They're absolutely brilliant. I was lucky enough a few years ago to be on the RHS assessment group for the Hamamelis, looking at order garden merit and to judge the trial of them down in Kent when they were all in flower. I mean, they're beautiful, and you really get in touch with the small variations in fragrance from them as
Yeah.
well. So yeah, they're a beautiful group of plants. Um, and in the summer and the summer flowering things are the really hard ones because there are so many spectacular plants.
Yeah.
I think one day when I'm on desert island discs and I have to pick the plants I'm taking to my desert island with me, I'm going to really struggle.
Oh, well, it's something we all do. I mean, I think every plant person, when you find someone, you come across someone evidently as you are, that is incredibly passionate about plants. It's always very difficult. And I quite often say to people that I get to a point like I am now, and I was explaining earlier that I've got say 100 plants that I am shuffling about in water trays that really need to go in the ground. I mean, not saying they're not doing very well, but they really need to move on to their next stage. I would quite often think to myself, oh, we've got such and such coming over at the weekend, maybe for dinner or a games night or whatever it might be. Oh, maybe I could give them X, Y, and Z. And I will quite often go to my trial area and I will select several bits and pieces and I'll bring them to the porch. And just before these people arrive, I often look at them thinking, no, I can't give that away. And I squirrel them back away. And my husband says to me, he said, I thought you were going to give X, Y, and Z. Yeah, there was like 4 plants here an hour ago. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I haven't finished with it. I can't give it away yet. they
Yes,
become they become very they're like my children. I can't do it. I can't give them away.
and I think as much as anything with plants, it's the story and the memory and the background. So I can track my horticultural career
Yes, yeah.
by some of the plants in the garden. So we launched Brunner Jack Frost at Chelsea
hmm
25 plus years ago,
Yeah,
probably 27, 28 years. I mean, that was the first of the silverleaf Brunners. It's an amazing plant.
yeah,
And
and I
I
think
have
we'll
a
be in an
huge
awful lot of
clump.
people's gardens by now as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love looking at that because it conjures up memories. I've got plants that friends have given me, and I look at them and I can picture them in their gardens, and I think of my friends, and it's the stories, and yeah, there's more woven into plants and gardens than just the plants themselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes I know the person that's bred it or developed it and the story behind where it's come from. And they're always really fascinating. And it just gives me a bit more of an excitement when I look at a plant.
Yeah, to be honest with you, your garden sounds very much like mine. Mine is very much a storybook of us moving. I keep saying that I've moved 640 plants to this garden that I lifted from my last garden and brought them here.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite a I got actually I asked online how the other day actually how I did that, and it actually happened at a very if it had happened at at a different season, at a different sort of period of the year, but the decision to move was made by sort of the end of November. So I had a very distinctive window, and we knew that we had to move by the end of the March the next year. So I had a very distinctive window where I knew that everything was going to be pretty much asleep. And if I worked quickly, I could get a lot of it out of the ground. So that involved like 4 tons of concrete compost. And I knew someone in the horticultural trade very well. So I would be able to lay my hands on a huge array of sizes of plant pots, everything from, I don't know, 200 litres all the way down to 2 litres. And I was able to literally lift everything and move it. But when we moved to this particular house, the house was in a right old mess. I mean, it needed so much that we had a hole in the roof that there was a tarpaulin over, and there was no kitchen, and it was awful. But the first thing to get done here was to lay out and plant the garden, because we were either faced with shuffling 640 plants around as the temperature started to rise and things started to grow, or get it in the ground. So I opted to get it in the ground pretty sharpish.
That's getting your priorities right. Garden and plants first, house second. You can always get a takeaway, can't you?
Well, yeah. My other half was very, very tolerant of that. But again, as I explained, it's like, well, I either water this lot or I put it in the ground and I give it an irrigation system. So yeah, we got it in the ground just as quickly as possible.
Lovely.
It's been really, really interesting to talk to you today, Charles. I want to thank you very much for your time. It's very evident that you are a plantsman through and through. You must be living, breathing, dreaming, and creating plants all the time.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and you're right. I adore plants.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been lovely talking to you, and hopefully I will catch up with you probably the next outing. You obviously mentioned you're doing the show at Bewley. Where else can the general public see Hilliers exhibiting this year? Because obviously that's a local show to us here, but where else can the public see you next year?
So we'll be at Bewley, and then we'll be up at the Gardeners World Live show.
Okay, wonderful. Right, I'll look forward to catching up with you then. Thank you so much for your time today. Take good care.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben.
Bye
I
bye now.
want to personally
Bye.
thank Charles for making the time in his incredibly busy schedule to talk to me just before Christmas. It left my mind completely boggled by the sheer amount of organisation and discipline it must take behind the scenes to ensure that they have the right plants at the right time of year, supplying not only 22 garden centres 50 weeks of the year, but also keeping their online shop stocked with plants that people want to buy when they want to buy them. This cannot be easy and must take not only a huge amount of skill, discipline, organisation, but horticultural knowledge at the same time. Next week, the Gardener Ben podcast is heading down to Brighton, and a conversation that was once again recorded just before Christmas. I get to talk to Anna from a company called Seedball. So I hope you join me next week for that conversation. The Gardener Ben podcast is brought to you in association with Peterbilt's Roses, winner of 30 Chelsea Gold medals and creating timeless roses since 1968. Go online and shop at www.peterbiltsroses.com and make sure that you're following along on Instagram and TikTok. Until next week, happy gardening.